The warship Oblivion Spear drifted in silent orbit above a dying star, its black hull swallowing the light that tried to touch it. Across its surface, ancient symbols glowed faintly, marks of conquest carved over centuries of uninterrupted victory. Supreme Commander Vale Torith stood at the center of the command bridge, his 4 eyes fixed on the holographic projection before him. It displayed a cluster of stars, small, insignificant, barely worth notice. To him, it was already conquered. Behind him, rows of officers moved with mechanical precision. No one spoke unless necessary. No one hesitated. This was the Kharvax Dominion, the most efficient war machine in known space. For 4,200 years, they had expanded. For 4,200 years, they had never lost. Not a single campaign had failed. Not a single species had resisted for long. Entire civilizations had collapsed within days of first contact. Others had surrendered before the first shot was fired. Their doctrine was simple: find, overwhelm, erase. And it had never failed. A junior officer stepped forward, his armor still bearing the polished sheen of recent promotion. "Commander," he said, voice steady but carrying the faintest edge of inexperience, "the target system has been confirmed." Vale did not turn. Designation: Sol System. Third planet identified as primary population center. A flicker of movement in the hologram. The system expanded: gas giants, asteroid belts, a small yellow star, and one blue world. Fragile, primitive, irrelevant. Vale finally spoke. "Technological assessment?" Another officer responded immediately. "Pre-interstellar civilization. Chemical propulsion. Limited orbital presence. Fragmented planetary governance. No unified defense grid." The pause. Then, almost as an afterthought, "They are not a threat." A faint ripple of amusement passed through the bridge. Vale tilted his head slightly, studying the planet more closely. Clouds swirled across its surface. Artificial lights flickered faintly on the dark side. Signals, millions of them, spilled into space in chaotic noise. Uncoordinated. Inefficient. "How many fleets have we lost in the last millennium?" Vale asked calmly. The question was rhetorical. "None," came the immediate reply. "How many worlds have resisted beyond initial engagement?" "0." Vale nodded once. "Then this will proceed as all others have." The hologram shifted again, now displaying a growing formation, warships emerging from hyperspace in precise alignment. Hundreds of them. Each one capable of annihilating a continent. Each one shielded against every known form of attack. An unstoppable force. "This operation," Vale continued, "will serve as a tactical exercise." That drew attention. Several officers turned. "A training campaign," he clarified. "New command units will lead the assault." The younger officers straightened instantly. This was not just another conquest. This was an opportunity. To conquer a world is routine, Vale said. To do so flawlessly is expected. His gaze returned to the blue planet. "So we will give them something rare." A slight pause. A challenge. No one questioned him. No one ever did. Because in 4,200 years, the Kharvax Dominion had never been wrong. And they had never met a species that could prove them otherwise. The bridge lights dimmed slightly as the tactical display shifted focus. The blue planet, Earth, expanded until it filled the entire chamber, rotating slowly in the void. To the Kharvax, it already looked conquered. "Begin full-spectrum analysis," Commander Vale ordered. Streams of data flooded the air. Signals intercepted. Visual feeds decoded. Military archives reconstructed in seconds. The chaotic noise of human civilization was dissected, categorized, and reduced to something the Dominion could understand. Or at least, something they believed they understood. A senior intelligence officer stepped forward, his tone clinical. "Surface activity indicates high population density concentrated in urban zones. Industrial output moderate. Energy consumption inefficient. Communications excessive." A faint pause. "They broadcast constantly." A few officers exchanged glances. Meaning, Phyllis, they do not conceal information. Military movements, political conflicts, even entertainment, all transmitted openly. That earned a low murmur. Primitive, someone muttered. Another officer added, or careless. The intelligence officer continued, unaffected. Planetary governance is fragmented into approximately 200 sovereign entities. Frequent internal conflicts observed. Resource disputes, territorial wars, ideological divisions. The display shifted. Footage of tanks rolling through deserts, aircraft engaging in dogfights, soldiers moving through ruined cities. Humans fighting humans. Inefficient. Predictable. Unified command structure? Phyllis. None, came the reply. Temporary alliances at best. No evidence of coordinated global defense strategy. That settled it. They are divided, Vale said flatly. Division is weakness. A younger officer, new to the command deck, allowed himself a slight smile. They conquer themselves for us. A few quiet chuckles followed. The analysis continued. Primary weapons, kinetic projectiles, explosive ordnance, nuclear fission devices. At that, several officers actually laughed. Nuclear, one said. Pre-energy era weaponry? Correct. Effective yield? Limited. Capable of surface devastation, but easily neutralized by standard shielding. Vale did not react. This was exactly what he expected. Space capability? He asked. The display zoomed outward, showing a handful of satellites, small orbital stations, and distant probes. Minimal, the officer replied. No combat vessels. No orbital weapons platforms. No deep space defenses. Another pause. They have not detected our probes. That was the final confirmation. They were blind. Blind and exposed. Vale stepped closer to the projection, observing the planet in silence for a moment longer. So, he said at last, they are fragmented, technologically inferior, and strategically unaware. Yes, Commander. And their response to external threat? The officer hesitated, just slightly. Unknown. That drew Vale's attention. Clarify. They have no recorded history of extraterrestrial conflict. Their response patterns are theoretical. Another officer scoffed. Irrelevant. Without capability, response does not matter. Agreed, Vale said. The hesitation was dismissed. The display shifted again, this time showing human cultural data. Broadcasts, films, digital media. Scenes of fictional alien invasions filled the air. Humans fighting impossible odds. Humans winning. The bridge grew quieter, not from concern, but from amusement. They imagine victory, one officer said. Against forces they cannot comprehend, another added. Vale watched the footage closely. Explosions. Heroic last stands. Dramatic speeches about survival and defiance. Fantasy. Interesting, he murmured. The officers waited. They understand the concept of invasion, Vale continued. They anticipate it. They prepare for it, in theory. And in reality? The young officer asked. Vale turned slightly, his expression unreadable. In reality, he said, they will do what all species do. A brief silence. They will panic. That settled the matter. The bridge returned to its steady rhythm. Data streams slowed. The planet continued its silent rotation. Already doomed. How many ships will we deploy? The young officer asked, unable to hide his curiosity. Vale didn't answer immediately. He studied Earth one last time. Its oceans, its storms, its fragile atmosphere. Then he spoke. 500. The officer blinked. Commander, that exceeds standard deployment for a non-resistant world. It does. Then why? This is not about necessity, Vale interrupted calmly. It is about instruction. The realization spread quickly. A training exercise. The young officer straightened, understanding dawning. We will lead the assault? Yes. Excitement replaced restraint. Their first conquest. And against a target that posed no threat. Controlled. Guaranteed victory. Perfect. Vale turned away from the display. Prepare the fleet, he ordered. We will give them the standard offer. The officer nodded. And when they refuse? Vale's voice didn't change. They always refuse. A slight pause. Then we demonstrate why that is a mistake. The command echoed through the ship. Across the void, hundreds of warships aligned in perfect formation. Engines charged. Weapons primed. Shields flared to life. An empire moving with absolute certainty toward a world that had no idea what was coming, and no chance, as far as they believed, of surviving it. The fleet moved. 500 warships slipped through hyperspace in perfect synchronization, their drives bending reality into thin strands of light. Space itself seemed to recoil as the Kharvax Dominion forced its way forward. Inevitable, unstoppable, precise. Then just as suddenly, they arrived. The Sol system unfolded before them. A yellow star burned at the center, calm and indifferent. Planets traced their quiet orbits. Dust and rock drifted through the asteroid belt. And far ahead, blue, fragile. Position confirmed, the navigation officer reported. Outer system insertion complete. No detection signatures from planetary sensors. Vale didn't react. Of course not. The fleet held formation near the edge of the system, engines idling like restrained predators. Weapons systems hummed quietly beneath armored hulls. Shields shimmered, layered, and impenetrable. Everything was exactly as expected. Begin transmission, Vale ordered. A communications officer stepped forward, activating the universal translation matrix. Frequencies were opened: radio, laser, quantum relay, every channel the humans could possibly receive. The message would be unavoidable. Vale spoke clearly, each word measured, practiced. Civilization of Earth. You have been identified by the Kharvax Dominion. The transmission surged outward, racing toward the distant planet at the speed of light. Your world is now designated for acquisition. You will surrender all military and governmental authority immediately. On the display, Earth continued its slow rotation. Unaware. Unresponsive. You are granted a single opportunity to comply. A brief pause. Failure to surrender will result in total planetary subjugation. Another pause. Vale's tone never changed. You have 24 of your standard hours to respond. The transmission ended. Silence settled over the bridge. The officers waited. They had done this before, hundreds of times. The pattern was always the same. Confusion. Panic. And eventually, submission. Signal confirmation? Vale asked. Message received across all major human communication networks, the officer replied. Global dissemination confirmed. Good. Now they would wait. Minutes passed. The fleet remained perfectly still at the edge of the system. No advance. No aggression. Just presence. A silent threat hanging in space. They should be responding by now, the young officer muttered. They are, another replied. You simply cannot see it. On the display, human transmissions spiked, millions of signals crossing the planet. Governments contacting each other. Military networks activating. Civilian systems erupting in confusion. Exactly as predicted. They are panicking, the officer added with quiet satisfaction. Vale said nothing. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Still no direct reply. The young officer frowned slightly. Delay suggests disorganization. Or disbelief, another offered. Both are irrelevant, Vale said calmly. They will respond. And then, they have. All attention snapped to the communication station. A signal has been isolated, the officer continued. Single-source transmission. Origin, planetary surface. Display it. The chaotic noise of Earth's communications vanished, replaced by one clean signal. Audio only. No visual feed. No encryption. Just a voice. Translation active, the officer confirmed. The bridge fell silent. The message played. A human voice, steady, unhurried, completely calm. You have 24 hours to leave our system. That was it. No distortion. No hesitation. 6 words. The transmission ended. Silence. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The words hung in the air, almost unreal. A sharp, clicking sound. He was laughing. Not loudly. Not wildly. Just enough. Around him, the tension broke. Officers exchanged looks, then joined in. Low amusement rippled across the bridge. Did they understand the message? One officer asked, barely containing a grin. They must have, another replied. Which makes this even more entertaining. The young officer shook his head in disbelief. They are threatening us? Attempting to, someone corrected. Vale raised a hand slightly, and the laughter faded. His expression returned to neutral, though a trace of amusement lingered in his voice. Courage, he said. Or ignorance? Does it matter? The young officer asked. No. Vale turned back to the display, studying Earth once more. They have been given their chance. A brief pause. We will honor their request. That drew a few surprised looks. Commander! We will wait 24 hours, Vale clarified. As they asked. Understanding spread quickly. Not respect. Mockery. Let them use the time, he continued, to prepare whatever futile resistance they believe will matter. The young officer smirked. Or to say goodbye. A few quiet laughs followed. Vale ignored them. Maintain position. Full readiness. No engagement until the deadline expires. Yes, Commander. Orders moved instantly across the fleet. 500 warships held their ground. Weapons primed. Shields active. Engines ready. A predator pausing before the strike. On the display, Earth continued to spin. Still calm. Still distant. Still silent. The young officer watched it carefully now, his earlier confidence sharpening into something more focused. They didn't sound afraid, he said. No one responded. Vale didn't look at him. Fear, the commander said quietly, comes after realization. A faint pause. They simply have not understood yet. The bridge settled into waiting mode. Time began to pass. 24 hours. For the Kharvax Dominion, it was nothing. For Earth, it was everything. And somewhere, far below that calm blue surface, something had already begun. The countdown began. 24 hours appeared on the Kharvax command display as a clean, precise sequence, time reduced to something measurable, predictable, already decided. For the Dominion, this was procedure. Another system. Another conquest waiting to be completed. For Earth, however, it was something entirely different. Commander Vale Torith stood motionless, watching the blue planet rotate in silence. There were no visible changes. No sudden military mobilization. No defensive formations rising to meet the incoming threat. No desperate signals reaching out toward the fleet. Just the same scattered transmissions, the same chaotic network of human communications spilling into space without order or discipline. It was exactly what the Dominion expected, and yet, something about it felt incomplete. They are doing nothing, the young officer said after several minutes, unable to hide the certainty in his voice. Vale responded without looking away from the display. Incorrect. They are doing everything they can. The officer hesitated briefly, then replied, which amounts to nothing of consequence. Vale did not answer this time. Across the fleet, long-range sensors continued their methodical sweep of the system. Every scan returned the same result. No anomalies. No energy spikes. No hidden installations. The asteroid belt remained quiet and undisturbed. Mars showed no indication of military development. The outer planets drifted in predictable silence. There was no fleet hiding in the dark, no defensive grid waiting to activate. Every data point reinforced the same conclusion. There was nothing in this system capable of resisting them. And yet, the silence persisted in a way that did not match expectation. They should be attempting communication, one officer noted, reviewing incoming planetary signals. Negotiation would be the logical response. Delay tactics, surrender conditions, something to preserve their civilization. Or evacuation, another added. Primitive species tend to prioritize survival when confronted with overwhelming force. But they haven't done either, the first officer replied. That observation settled uneasily across the bridge. No surrender message had been received. No plea for mercy. No attempt to stall for time. Only that single transmission. You have 24 hours to leave our system. Vale replayed it again in his mind, not focusing on the words themselves, but on the delivery. There had been no panic, no aggression, no desperation, just calm certainty. And certainty without capability did not align with any known behavioral model. Run a deeper scan, Vale ordered suddenly. The bridge reacted instantly. Specify parameters? The sensor officer asked. Everything, Vale said. Subspace fluctuations, gravitational variance, thermal inconsistencies. I want irregularities, not confirmations. The order pushed beyond standard protocol, but no one questioned it. Advanced scanning systems activated, probing deeper into the system than before. Data flooded the displays, more complex and less filtered. The algorithms searched not for obvious threats, but for patterns that did not belong. Seconds passed, then minutes. Finally, the report came. No significant findings. Minor solar radiation fluctuations within expected thresholds. No concealed energy sources. No structural anomalies. The system remains normal. The young officer exhaled slightly, reassured. Commander, there is nothing here. Vale remained still, his gaze fixed on Earth. Yes, he said quietly. That is what concerns me. No one responded to that. Because for the first time, the certainty on the bridge had shifted, not into fear, but into something unfamiliar. Far beyond the reach of their scans, deep within the cold silence of the system, objects drifted undetected. They reflected no light, emitted no heat, and produced no energy signature that Dominion sensors could recognize. Against the vast darkness of space, they were effectively invisible. To the Kharvax fleet, they did not exist. On Earth, the situation was unfolding very differently. There had been shock when the message arrived, but it had passed quickly. Not because the threat was small, but because it had been anticipated. Across the planet, systems activated in silence. No public chaos. No visible panic. Instead, encrypted communications flowed between governments, military installations, and research facilities. Commands were issued with precision. Protocols long prepared were executed without hesitation. Facilities hidden beneath oceans, deserts, and mountains came online. Power grids shifted. Orbital assets adjusted their positions, not toward the enemy, but into patterns that avoided detection and prediction. Everything moved quietly, efficiently, deliberately. They had never known exactly when this moment would come, or what form it would take. But they had always known it would come eventually. And they had prepared accordingly. Back aboard the Oblivion Spear, the countdown continued. 20 hours remaining. Still nothing visible had changed. They are either irrational, the young officer said, his earlier confidence returning, or they do not understand the situation they are in. Or neither, Vale replied. The officer frowned slightly. Then what are they doing? Vale's eyes remained fixed on the planet. Waiting. For what? This time, Vale did not answer immediately, because the truth was unclear even to him. Something about the situation felt incomplete. Not dangerous, not yet, but inconsistent. It was as if they were observing only part of the system, missing something that should have been obvious. The data said one thing. The behavior suggested another. They had no defenses, the intelligence officer said, reviewing earlier reports again. No fleet. No weapons platforms. No unified command structure. Correct, Vale said. And yet they did not surrender. Yes. The officer hesitated before continuing. That contradicts all known models. Vale finally turned to face him. Then update the models. The room fell silent. Because for the first time in thousands of years, the Kharvax Dominion had encountered something that did not behave according to expectation. Something that did not follow the patterns they had studied, predicted, and conquered countless times before. Something new. And far beyond their perception, Hidden in the dark between planets, humanity's response was already moving into position. The countdown continued. 18 hours remaining. The Kharvax fleet waited with complete confidence, certain that the outcome was inevitable. Certain that this was already decided. They were wrong. They simply had not realized it yet. 18 months earlier, far beyond Earth's orbit in the silent expanse between Mars and Jupiter, a mining vessel named Atlas Dawn drifted through the asteroid belt. Its mission was routine: resource extraction, mineral mapping, long-duration survey work. Nothing about it was meant to matter beyond quarterly reports and profit margins. That changed the moment its sensors detected something that should not exist. "Captain, you need to see this." The object appeared on the display as a small metallic structure tumbling slowly through space. It was no larger than a storage crate, smooth and seamless, with no visible seams, propulsion, or markings. It reflected almost no light, as if it had been designed to avoid attention entirely. It was not human. Every person on the bridge understood that instantly. "Bring it in," the captain ordered. No one questioned the decision. Remote manipulators extended carefully, securing the object and pulling it into a sealed containment chamber. Every precaution was taken. Radiation scans, material analysis, structural mapping, nothing about it matched known science. The readings were wrong in ways that made them impossible to ignore. "No identifiable alloy composition," the science officer reported. "No active power source. No emissions. But there's internal structure, layered, dense. Meaning, it's not debris. It's constructed. Intentionally." A pause settled over the room. "Can you access it?" The officer hesitated. "There's a data core. Encrypted. Not like anything we've seen before." That was enough. A priority transmission was sent to Earth immediately. Within minutes, the signal reached command networks. Within hours, the information spread beyond any single government's control. This was no longer a classified discovery, it was a global event. 6 hours after the object was found, every major power on Earth knew about it. 12 hours later, an emergency session was convened. It was not public. It was not announced. But it was absolute. For the first time in human history, the discussion was not about borders, resources, or influence. It was about survival. The probe was transported under maximum security to a joint research facility. Access was granted to the best minds available: physicists, engineers, cryptographers, AI specialists, anyone capable of extracting meaning from something clearly beyond human design. What followed was not orderly collaboration. It was controlled chaos. Thousands of independent teams attacked the problem simultaneously. Competing approaches were encouraged. No single method was trusted. If one failed, another continued. If 10 failed, 100 replaced them. Humanity did not solve problems by waiting. It overwhelmed them. The encryption began to break within days. Not because it was simple, but because nothing could withstand that level of pressure forever. When the data core finally opened, the room fell silent. Inside were star maps, vast, precise, far beyond anything humanity had charted. Navigation routes stretched across sectors no human vessel had ever reached. Observation logs recorded hundreds of worlds, species, and systems. And among them, analyzed, observed over time. That alone was enough to trigger alarm. But it was the final dataset that changed everything. A projected trajectory. A fleet was coming. There was no debate after that. No disagreement, no delay, no political maneuvering. Within 24 hours, a unified decision was made. Every nation on Earth agreed. Not partially. Not strategically. Completely. All active conflicts were suspended. Military operations ceased. Resources were redirected. Economic systems shifted toward a single objective: preparation. The transition was immediate. Manufacturing infrastructure converted to military production. Research institutions abandoned long-term theory for rapid application. Projects once considered too expensive, too unstable, or too unrealistic were reopened without hesitation. Constraints no longer mattered. Only results did. General Elena Voss stood deep within a secured command complex, reviewing the flood of proposals arriving from across the planet. Every idea was evaluated under a new standard, not whether it was safe, but whether it could work in time. "Status?" she asked. Multiple responses came in rapid succession. Orbital defense grid, insufficient coverage. Directed energy systems, power limitations. Kinetic acceleration platforms, viable with current materials. Quantum state applications, unstable, but progressing. Voss processed it all without hesitation. "We don't need perfect," she said. "We need effective." That became the guiding principle. The first viable solution came from something deceptively simple: velocity. One engineer reframed the problem entirely. Instead of developing more complex weapons, they proposed removing complexity altogether. No payload, no explosive, no advanced guidance system, just mass and speed. The physics was undeniable. A dense object accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed would carry enough kinetic energy to rival nuclear-scale destruction on impact. No interception system could reliably stop it. No shield designed for energy absorption would respond correctly to solid matter moving at relativistic velocity. Project Kinetic was approved immediately. Construction began in the asteroid belt. Not large installations, those would be too visible, but distributed platforms hidden among natural debris. Hundreds of independent rail systems were deployed, each designed to operate autonomously, each capable of accelerating tungsten projectiles to extreme velocities. They emitted no signals. They generated minimal heat. They became part of the environment. Invisible. Patient. Waiting. The second breakthrough pushed beyond conventional physics. Quantum theory had always resisted control. It was unpredictable by nature, difficult to apply in stable systems. But under pressure, theoretical limits became targets rather than barriers. The concept was radical: create weapons that did not fully exist until the moment of impact. Not cloaked, not shielded, but fundamentally unresolvable by detection systems until interaction occurred. Early prototypes failed repeatedly. Systems collapsed. Data became inconsistent. Entire research teams reached dead ends. But others didn't. Eventually, stability was achieved, briefly, but reliably enough. Project Phantom moved forward. The third project redefined scale. Energy had always been a limiting factor in weapon design. Generating, storing, and directing it required infrastructure that was difficult to conceal and vulnerable to attack. So the approach changed. Instead of generating energy, they would redirect it. The sun provided more energy in seconds than humanity had used in its entire history. The problem had never been availability, only control. Thousands of mirror satellites were constructed and launched into carefully calculated positions. Individually insignificant, collectively precise, they formed arrays capable of focusing solar radiation into concentrated beams. The engineering challenges were enormous. Alignment, synchronization, thermal tolerance, every variable had to be solved under extreme time constraints. They solved them anyway. Project Helios became operational. 18 months passed in relentless acceleration. There were no pauses, no resets, no fallback plans. Every failure was corrected immediately. Every success was scaled as fast as possible. Sleep became secondary. Time became the only resource that mattered. By the end, the solar system was no longer what it had been. It looked the same from the outside. But it wasn't. When the Kharvax fleet entered the system, they saw nothing unusual. No defensive grid. No warships. No visible weapons. Their scans confirmed what they expected. What they did not see were the rail platforms already aligned to predicted entry coordinates. They did not detect the quantum weapons positioned beyond conventional space. They did not recognize the solar arrays slowly adjusting their angles far closer to the sun. They saw emptiness. What existed instead was preparation. Back in the present, Commander Vale stood on the bridge of the Oblivion Spear, reviewing unchanged reports. Every system reading remained consistent. No threats. No anomalies. No resistance. Earth remained silent. 17 hours remained. On the planet below, General Voss stood in a command center filled with controlled stillness. No one spoke unnecessarily. Every system was monitored. Every variable accounted for. All preparations were complete. They had built everything they could. Now it came down to execution. Hold all activity, Voss ordered. No transmissions. No movement outside designated parameters. She paused, then added quietly, "Let them believe we are exactly what they think we are." The countdown continued. 16 hours remaining. Neither side moved. But only one side understood that the outcome had already been set in motion. Aboard the Oblivion Spear, the silence had become routine. 16 hours remained, and to the Kharvax Dominion, the system still appeared unchanged, quiet, predictable, defenseless. Every scan continued to confirm the same conclusion. No fleet. No weapons grid. No escalation. Only a primitive world waiting to be claimed. Commander Vale stood at the center of the bridge, reviewing the latest sensor data. Nothing had shifted. Nothing had revealed itself. And yet, the absence of change had begun to feel less like confirmation and more like concealment. "Reconfirm all tactical scans," he ordered. "They have been reconfirmed," the sensor officer replied. "Multiple passes. Multiple spectrums. No threat signatures detected." "Run them again." The officer complied without hesitation. Around the bridge, systems continued their quiet operation. Weapons remained calibrated. Navigation systems aligned for eventual advance. Everything followed doctrine perfectly. Everything except certainty. Far from the fleet, hidden among drifting rock and debris, the first layer of humanity's defense waited in complete stillness. The rail platforms of Project Kinetic blended seamlessly into the asteroid belt. Their surfaces mirrored surrounding material. Their thermal output was negligible. Their systems remained dormant, indistinguishable from the environment around them. Each platform carried a single tungsten rod. Dense, simple, and unremarkable in isolation. But within an electromagnetic accelerator, that simplicity became devastating. Once fired, the projectile would reach a fraction of light speed, transforming into a weapon of pure kinetic destruction. No explosive charge was required. No guidance system was necessary after launch. The physics alone ensured the outcome. At that velocity, impact energy rivaled nuclear scale force, and unlike energy-based attacks, it would not be absorbed or deflected in predictable ways. It would strike with absolute inevitability. On Earth, General Voss stood before a layered tactical interface displaying the entire solar system. Every hidden asset was mapped precisely: positions, timing windows, trajectories. Nothing had been left uncertain. "Confirm kinetic alignment," she said. "All platforms locked to predicted emergence vectors," a technician responded. "Firing solutions calculated. Margin of error less than 0.03%. Time to impact? Immediate upon command for first wave." Voss nodded slightly. The first strike would not depend on reaction. It had already been set in motion the moment the fleet entered the system. Beyond Mars' orbit, the second layer of defense existed in a far less conventional form. Project Phantom did not occupy space in the traditional sense. Its weapons existed in unstable quantum states, unresolved until the moment of interaction. To any sensor system, they appeared as inconsistencies, data fluctuations that could not be defined or tracked. Even if detected, they could not be followed. Because they were not fully present. "Phantom system status," Voss asked. "Quantum coherence stable. Phase integrity within limits," came the reply. "All units synchronized." Detection probability? Effectively 0 until activation. That was the advantage. Conventional defense relied on tracking, predicting, and intercepting threats. But something that did not exist in a fixed state could not be predicted. It could only be encountered, and by then it would be too late. Closer to the sun, the final system adjusted itself with slow precision. Project Helios operated on a scale far beyond conventional weapon design. Thousands of mirror satellites rotated in coordinated patterns, each reflecting solar radiation along calculated vectors. Individually harmless, collectively devastating. The system did not generate energy. It redirected it. The sun provided more power than any artificial system could hope to match. The challenge had always been control. Now, control had been achieved. Helios alignment? Voss asked. Primary arrays in position. Secondary arrays adjusting for convergence, the technician replied. Maximum output? There was a brief pause before the answer came. Sufficient for complete target saturation. That was all that needed to be said. Back on the Kharvax flagship, the waiting continued. 15 hours remained. The young officer shifted slightly, his earlier confidence returning as the system continued to present no threat. Commander, we have completed multiple full-spectrum scans. There is still no indication of hidden defenses. Vale did not immediately respond. Continue scanning. Yes, Commander. The officer hesitated before speaking again. Even if something were hidden, it would require energy, infrastructure, or movement. We would detect it. Vale turned slightly, his expression calm but firm. That is true for systems operating within known parameters. The implication lingered in the air. Unknown parameters. The officer straightened. Until proven otherwise, we must assume they are incapable of resistance. Vale's gaze returned to the distant planet. We assume nothing. On Earth, the command center remained steady. Every operator focused. Every system monitored. There was no panic, no urgency, only execution. Review engagement sequence, Voss ordered. The display shifted through layers of strategy. First strike, kinetic impact. Second, quantum disruption. Third, energy saturation. Each phase built upon the previous one, ensuring no single failure could compromise the outcome. Redundancy was not optional, it was essential. A junior officer spoke cautiously. Why not engage immediately? Voss answered without hesitation. Because timing determines outcome. She studied the display before continuing. They expect panic, disorganization, a delayed response. We give them exactly what they expect. The officer nodded slowly, understanding forming. Let them stay confident, she said. Let them commit fully. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Then we end it. The Kharvax fleet remained in perfect formation at the edge of the system. Weapons were primed. Shields were active. Every system prepared for a decisive engagement they believed would be one-sided. 14 hours remained. Commander Vale observed the system once more. Nothing had changed. No movement. No defense. No response. Only silence. But beneath that silence, something remained unresolved. Not visible. Not measurable. But present. He had fought countless campaigns. He understood fear, resistance, desperation. This was none of those. This was absence. And absence, when it should not exist, was not weakness. It was a variable. He did not speak that thought aloud. Instinct had no place in Dominion doctrine. And yet, far beyond his perception, every human system was already aligned. Every weapon was positioned. Every calculation was complete. The fleet had entered the battlefield the moment it arrived. It simply had not realized it yet. 14 hours became 10, and 10 became 6. Time, once irrelevant to the Kharvax Dominion, began to carry weight, not because of urgency, but because of expectation. Every conquest they had ever executed followed a predictable pattern: contact, shock, resistance, collapse. This one had stalled in a way that made no sense. Nothing had happened. The fleet remained perfectly aligned at the edge of the system, fully armed and completely unchallenged. Earth continued its slow rotation, offering no response beyond the single message it had already delivered. There were no updates, no negotiations, no visible attempts at defense. Only silence. Commander Vale stood at the center of the bridge, watching the planet with controlled focus. His officers had stopped speculating. Every scan had been repeated, every system checked, every possibility reviewed. The conclusion remained unchanged, yet the situation felt increasingly incomplete. They are committed to silence, the young officer said, his tone now analytical rather than dismissive. Yes, Vale replied. Psychological tactic? Possibly. To create uncertainty? Perhaps. The officer glanced at the display. It is ineffective. Vale did not respond, because that was not entirely true. The silence had not created fear, but it had created attention. And attention, sustained long enough, began to question even certainty. Begin final readiness protocols, Vale ordered. The bridge responded immediately. Weapons systems transitioned to active targeting states. Shield frequencies adjusted for maximum resilience. Fleet formation tightened, every ship aligning with precision for coordinated assault. Confidence was no longer passive, it had become structured readiness. Across the fleet, 500 warships synchronized. Energy levels rose steadily. Targeting solutions mapped across Earth's surface. Command hierarchies locked into combat mode. This was the moment the Dominion understood best, the final stage before inevitable victory. On Earth, the atmosphere was entirely different. There was no visible escalation, no public panic, no global announcements of imminent war. Civilian systems continued to operate with controlled normalcy, guided quietly by hidden protocols. But beneath that surface, everything was active. Every defense system was fully operational. Every weapon was locked in position. Every calculation had been verified repeatedly. General Voss stood before the system-wide tactical display, her eyes fixed on the Kharvax fleet markers at the edge of the solar system. They had not moved. They were exactly where she needed them to be. Status, she said. All systems ready. Kinetic platforms aligned. Phantom systems stable. Helios arrays synchronized. Final timing check. Engagement window optimal in 5 hours, 32 minutes. Maintain passive state, Voss ordered. A junior officer hesitated slightly. Ma'am, if they advance early? They won't, Voss said with complete certainty. They believe they control the timeline. That belief will keep them in position. The officer nodded, understanding the logic. Back aboard the Oblivion Spear, the countdown dropped below 5 hours. The young officer stepped closer to the display, studying Earth more carefully now. They haven't repositioned anything, he said. No satellites, no energy spikes, no launch signatures. Then they have nothing to reposition, he concluded. Vale responded calmly. That is an assumption. It is the only logical one. Logic is dependent on complete information, Vale said. And our information may not be complete. This time, the officer did not argue. 4 hours remained. Internal fleet communications increased slightly, not from disorder, but from coordination. Final checks were executed. System redundancies confirmed. Each vessel prepared to fulfill its role in the assault. The formation tightened further, compressing into an optimized structure for maximum strike efficiency. On Earth, Voss observed the same shift on her display. Formation density increasing, a technician reported. Expected, she replied. They are optimizing for coordinated attack. Another technician spoke quietly. That increases their vulnerability. Voss did not look away from the screen. Yes. It does. 3 hours remained. The Kharvax fleet began minor positional adjustments, subtle movements signaling readiness for forward advance once the deadline expired. Engines warmed. Vectors shifted slightly toward Earth. The young officer allowed himself a small smile. At last. Vale remained silent. 2 hours remained. The silence across the system deepened, but something subtle had changed. Human communication networks were still active, but no longer chaotic. Patterns had formed. Signals aligned in structured flows. Commander, the sensor officer said, human transmissions are becoming more organized. Clarify. They are no longer random. There is coordination, but not in a way that suggests conventional military mobilization. The young officer frowned. Then what does it suggest? The sensor officer hesitated. I cannot determine. Vale watched the data carefully. Continue monitoring. 1 hour remained. Every system aboard every Kharvax vessel reached peak readiness. Weapons fully charged. Shields reinforced. Targeting solutions locked across strategic planetary locations. The fleet was no longer waiting. It was prepared to act. On Earth, the command center had gone completely still. Every operator focused on their station. Every system monitored in real time. There were no unnecessary movements, no wasted words. Final confirmation, Voss said. All systems ready. Engagement sequence locked. Confirmed. Synchronization complete. Voss nodded once. Hold. 30 minutes remained. The Kharvax fleet began a slow forward drift, controlled and deliberate. It was not yet an attack, but it was the beginning of one. The shift was subtle, almost ceremonial, signaling inevitability. The young officer straightened. This is it. Vale did not respond. 15 minutes remained. The distance between the fleet and the inner system began to close. Still no resistance. Still no visible defense. Confidence returned completely. 5 minutes remained. Prepare to advance, Vale ordered. Acknowledged. 1 minute remained. Every system locked into final state. Every command aligned. Every expectation unchanged. On Earth, Voss looked at the countdown. Stand by. No one spoke. 10 seconds remained. The Kharvax fleet moved as one, engines igniting in synchronized precision, formation advancing toward Earth. 5 seconds. The young officer allowed himself a final thought that this operation had been too easy. 3 seconds. The fleet accelerated. 2 seconds. Weapons primed for immediate engagement. 1 second. Engage, Vale began. The command never finished. Because in that exact moment, everything changed. The command never finished. Every sensor aboard the Kharvax fleet activated at once. Not gradually. Not in sequence. Instantly. The tactical display exploded with signals. Contacts, the sensor officer shouted, his voice breaking for the first time. Multiple high-velocity objects, bearing all vectors. The screen filled with trajectories. Thousands of them. Not originating from a single direction, but from everywhere at once. Asteroid fields, deep orbital paths, empty space that had been scanned repeatedly and declared clear. Velocity? Vale demanded. The answer came with hesitation. 0.3 light speed. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. That number did not make sense. It could not. These readings are incorrect, the young officer said immediately. They are confirmed, the sensor officer replied. Multiple systems agree. Vale's voice cut through the rising tension. Time to impact. 12 seconds. That was not enough time to think. Point defense, full engagement, Vale ordered. All ships, evasive maneuvers. The fleet reacted instantly. Formation broke as ships shifted trajectories, engines flaring to maximum output. Defensive systems activated at full capacity. Laser arrays ignited, sweeping through space in precise patterns designed to intercept incoming threats. It wasn't enough. The first projectiles became visible only moments before impact, thin streaks of distorted light cutting through space faster than the eye could track. One struck a destroyer at the outer edge of the formation. Its shields flared once, violently, as if attempting to respond. Then they failed. Not gradually. Completely. The tungsten rod passed through the shield without slowing, without deflecting, without interacting in any way the system understood. It hit the hull and continued through it as if the ship were not there. Armor vaporized instantly under the kinetic energy release. Internal systems collapsed in the same moment. The ship did not explode immediately. It simply ceased to function. Then its reactor failed. And it vanished in a flash of expanding debris. Shields ineffective, the weapons officer shouted. Impossible, the young officer said, staring at the display. But it wasn't. More impacts followed. Dozens. Hundreds. The fleet dissolved into chaos as projectiles tore through ships at relativistic speed. Some were intercepted. Point defense systems managed to destroy a fraction of the incoming mass, but there were too many. Far too many. Each successful hit was catastrophic. Cruisers split apart mid-structure. Battleships lost entire sections in fractions of a second. Engines, command decks, weapon systems, everything failed under the sheer force of impact. "Adjust shield modulation," someone shouted. "It's not working." Because it couldn't. The shields had never been designed to stop matter moving at that velocity. They were built for energy, for radiation, for predictable forms of attack. This was something else. This was physics used as a weapon. In 12 seconds, over 100 Kharvax warships were gone. The formation no longer existed. "Return fire," Vale commanded. The surviving ships responded immediately. Plasma cannons fired. Particle beams lanced forward. Missile systems launched in coordinated volleys, targeting Earth with overwhelming force. The void between the fleet and the planet lit up with destructive energy. The weapons disappeared. No impact. No detonation. No deflection. They simply ceased to exist. "What happened?" the young officer demanded. The sensor officer stared at his console. "We lost tracking. All projectiles gone." "That is not possible." A new alert cut through the confusion. Unknown contacts detected. Where? Everywhere. Unlike the first wave, these signatures were unstable. They flickered in and out of existence, appearing for fractions of a second before vanishing again. Their trajectories could not be plotted. Their positions could not be predicted. "They are not fully in phase," the sensor officer said, his voice unsteady. "They're fluctuating." Vale understood immediately. Impact timing? No stable lock. The first one appeared inside a cruiser's shield. There was no approach. No warning. It simply existed, already in contact with the hull. Then it detonated. Not with a wide explosion, but with precise, contained force. The blast tore through critical systems, engines, control centers, power cores, leaving the outer structure partially intact but functionally destroyed. More followed. Quantum missiles. Each one materialized at the moment of impact, bypassing every defensive system the Kharvax possessed. Shields were irrelevant. Detection was meaningless. By the time they were observed, they had already struck. The fleet's remaining structure collapsed further. Ships drifted, disabled. Others lost propulsion entirely. Command networks fractured as communication systems failed under targeted strikes. Navigational systems offline across multiple vessels, an officer reported. Weapons disabled on primary carriers. Drive cores compromised. The Kharvax fleet was no longer fighting. It was disintegrating. "Retreat," Vale ordered, his voice still controlled, but now carrying urgency. "All ships initiate hyperspace jump. Immediate withdrawal." Commands spread rapidly, but execution faltered. Drive systems unresponsive. Charging sequences interrupted. "We cannot stabilize jump coordinates." The quantum strikes had been precise. They had not destroyed everything. They had disabled escape. And then the final system activated. Sensors detected it first, an energy surge unlike anything previously recorded. It did not originate from a ship. It did not follow a trajectory. It formed. Between the fleet and the sun. Thousands of points of reflection aligned simultaneously. Mirror satellites adjusted in perfect synchronization, redirecting solar radiation into concentrated paths. "Energy convergence detected," the sensor officer whispered. Vale stared at the display as the readings climbed beyond expected limits. "Source. The star." Understanding came too late. "They are using their sun," the officer said. The beams formed instantly. 3 massive columns of concentrated solar energy crossed the distance between the inner system and the fleet in seconds. They were not projectiles. They were continuous streams, focused, sustained, overwhelming. The first beam struck a cluster of damaged ships. There was no resistance. Shields failed in less than a second. Armor followed immediately after. Matter itself broke down under the intensity, molecular bonds collapsing as energy stripped structure apart. Ships did not explode. They disintegrated. Entire vessels vanished into expanding plasma, their mass converted into energy and scattered into space. The beams swept across the battlefield with controlled precision, adjusting in real time, tracking the largest concentrations of surviving targets. Everywhere they touched, nothing remained. The Kharvax fleet, once perfectly ordered, was reduced to fragments and fading signals. Vale stood in silence as the scale of destruction unfolded around him. His command systems were failing. His fleet was gone. Not defeated. Erased. Within minutes. The Oblivion Spear shuddered as one of the beams passed near its position, heat spikes registering across the hull. Systems overloaded. Secondary functions collapsed. Structural integrity dropping, an officer reported. Life support compromised. Vale did not move. He watched the last remnants of his fleet disappear from the display. 500 warships had entered the system. Almost none remained. And only now did he understand. This had never been a battle. It had been an execution. Silence returned to the battlefield, but it was no longer the calm of anticipation. It was the silence that follows total destruction. Fragments of the Kharvax fleet drifted through space, twisted metal, cooling plasma, shattered hulls that had once carried the Dominion's certainty across the stars. What remained of their formation was gone. What remained of their confidence had vanished with it. On the bridge of the Oblivion Spear, warning systems pulsed in fading intervals. Power fluctuations rolled through the ship. Entire sections had gone dark. Emergency lighting cast long shadows across damaged consoles and silent crew stations. Reports came in, fragmented and incomplete. Primary weapon systems offline. Drive core unstable. External communications disrupted. Casualty levels unknown. Commander Vale did not interrupt. He did not issue orders. For the first time in his command, there was nothing left to command. The tactical display showed only 2 functioning ships, the flagship, and 1 escort vessel, drifting at the edge of the destruction field. Out of 500, the young officer stood frozen, staring at the screen as if it might correct itself. This cannot be accurate. No one answered him, because it was. The Dominion had not faced defeat. It had faced something worse. Irrelevance. A new signal interrupted the failing systems. Incoming transmission, the communications officer said, his voice barely steady. Origin, Earth. No one spoke. Put it through, Vale said quietly. The same voice as before filled the bridge. Controlled. Unchanged. You have 1 operational vessel capable of hyperspace travel. Vale's eyes shifted slightly toward the escort ship marker. We are transferring energy to your remaining ship. A faint fluctuation registered across the systems as external power began to stabilize the escort vessel. You will leave this system and return to your command. The words were not a threat. They were instructions. You will deliver a message. The bridge remained completely silent. Earth is defended. A brief pause followed. If you return, you will not be given another warning. The transmission ended. No distortion. No emotion. Final. The young officer exhaled slowly, as if the air had been pulled from the room. They're letting us go? Vale did not answer immediately. He understood something the others were only beginning to grasp. This is not mercy, he said. The officer turned toward him. Then what is it? Vale's gaze returned to the shattered remains of his fleet. It is strategy. The realization settled heavily across the bridge. They had not been spared out of compassion. They had been preserved for a purpose. To carry the message, Vale continued. To make sure others know. The weight of that truth was far greater than destruction. Because destruction ends a battle. But a message spreads it. Across the void, the escort vessel system stabilized fully under the incoming power transfer. Its engines came back online. Navigation systems reinitialized. It was being given exactly what it needed to escape. Given, not taken. The humiliation was precise. Controlled. Deliberate. Commander, the communications officer said quietly, we are receiving full system restoration on the escort vessel. Vale nodded once. Transfer all surviving crew, he ordered. There was no hesitation. No debate. Only execution. Damaged transport systems activated. Survivors were moved from broken sections of the flagship to the escort vessel. Every remaining life was accounted for, relocated, secured. Out of thousands, only a fraction remained. The young officer moved slowly, his earlier confidence completely gone. His voice, when he spoke, carried something new. They could have destroyed us all. Yes, Vale said. They chose not to. Yes. Why? Vale looked at him directly. So that we would understand. The officer lowered his gaze. Because understanding was worse than ignorance. Understanding meant accepting that everything they believed about their dominance, their superiority, their invincibility, had been wrong. The escort vessel signaled readiness. All remaining personnel accounted for, the operations officer reported. Jump systems stable. Vale took one final look at the battlefield. At the debris. At the silence. At the absence of everything that had once defined the Dominion's power. Then he gave the only order left to give. Prepare for hyperspace jump. The response came immediately. Coordinates set. Drive charging. Jump window open. No one spoke as the final preparations completed. There was nothing left to say. The escort vessel's engines ignited, not with the confidence of conquest, but with the urgency of escape. Space distorted around it as the hyperspace drive activated. In seconds, it was gone, leaving behind a system that no longer belonged to them. Back on Earth, the command center remained quiet as the final confirmation appeared on the display. Enemy vessel has exited the system. General Voss exhaled slowly. Stand down primary systems, she said. Around her, operators began powering down weapon platforms. Kinetic arrays returned to dormant states. Quantum systems disengaged. Solar alignment shifted away from combat configuration. The tension that had held for 18 months released, not into celebration, but into controlled relief. One of the officers spoke carefully. We could have destroyed the last ship. Voss nodded. Yes. Why didn't we? She looked at the empty space where the fleet had been. Because they need to remember. The officer understood. A destroyed enemy disappears. A surviving one carries fear. Across the system, silence settled again. But this time, it was different. It was not the silence of waiting. It was the silence of something proven. Earth was no longer an unknown variable. It was a confirmed reality. And that reality would spread. The journey back to Kharvax space took 8 months. 8 months of silence. 8 months of replaying the same 7 minutes of destruction over and over again. The escort vessel moved through hyperspace without conversation, without ceremony, without the pride that once defined every Dominion campaign. What remained of the crew carried something far heavier than defeat. They carried proof. Commander Vale spent most of the journey reviewing the battle recordings. Every angle. Every system log. Every failed response. He studied the kinetic impacts, the way the projectiles ignored their shields entirely. He studied the quantum strikes that bypassed detection. He studied the solar weapon that had erased entire warships as if they had never existed. There were no errors in execution. No tactical mistakes. No moment where the outcome could have been changed. The conclusion was unavoidable. They had not been outmaneuvered. They had been outmatched. By a species they had classified as primitive. The survivors felt it in different ways. Some refused to speak. Others refused to look at the data at all. The young officer who had once questioned the size of the fleet sat in silence for most of the journey, his earlier confidence replaced by something colder, understanding. Reports were sent ahead to the Dominion command structure, but the responses that came back were predictable. Disbelief. Rejection. Accusations of error. The idea that 500 warships had been destroyed in minutes by a non-interstellar civilization did not fit within the Dominion's model of reality. It sounded impossible. Until they arrived. The escort vessel emerged into Kharvax space under heavy escort protocols. Security fleets surrounded it immediately, weapons ready, as if expecting contamination, sabotage, or deception. The returning crew was transferred under strict supervision, and Vale was escorted directly to the central command chamber. The highest military authority of the Dominion waited there. Generals, admirals, strategists who had never seen defeat. They did not greet him as a returning commander. They regarded him as a problem to be explained. You were given 500 warships, the high strategist said, his voice controlled but edged with anger. You return with one damaged vessel and a fraction of your personnel. Explain. Vale did not hesitate. He activated the recording. The chamber filled with holographic projections of the battle. The fleet advancing. The sudden detection of incoming projectiles. The first impacts. The collapse of shields. The cascade of destruction. No one interrupted. They watched the entire sequence. The kinetic strikes tearing through ships as if defenses did not exist. The quantum weapons appearing inside their formations. The solar beams erasing what remained. 7 minutes. When the recording ended, the chamber was silent. Not from confusion. From realization. They had no shields, one admiral said slowly. No plasma weapons. No fleet. They did not need them, Vale replied. Another strategist leaned forward. Explain the projectiles. Relativistic mass drivers, Vale said. Simple in concept. Impossible to counter with our current defenses. And the second phase? Quantum state weapons. Undetectable until impact. Our systems cannot respond to what they cannot observe. And the final attack? Vale paused briefly. They weaponized their star. The words carried weight, because they meant something fundamental had changed. For thousands of years, the Dominion's power had been based on superiority, technology, doctrine, experience. They had believed that advantage was permanent. It was not. They allowed you to return, the high strategist said. Yes. Why? Vale met his gaze directly. To deliver a message. Silence followed. Because everyone in the chamber understood what that meant. This had not been a battle. It had been a demonstration. A warning. If we send another fleet, one general said, what happens? Vale answered without hesitation. It will be destroyed. The certainty in his voice ended the debate before it began. Because it was no longer a question of strength. It was a question of reality. For the first time in Dominion history, they faced an opponent they could not overwhelm. The implications extended far beyond a single defeat. If this information spread, every conquered world would hear it. Every rival power would learn that the Dominion could be stopped. The foundation of their control, fear and inevitability, would fracture. The high strategist spoke again, more quietly now. What do you recommend? Vale did not hesitate. We do not return as conquerors. The chamber remained still. We return as equals. The words would have been unthinkable before. Now they were necessary. We initiate contact, Vale continued. We establish communication. We acknowledge their strength. Anything else risks total loss. The decision took time, but not as much as it would have in the past. Because the evidence was undeniable. The Dominion did not issue another invasion order. They sent a message. Months later, a single Kharvax vessel entered the Sol system. Not a fleet. Not an armada. One ship. Its weapons were powered down. Its shields reduced. Its intent clear. It was granted passage. On Earth, the meeting took place under controlled conditions. Representatives from across the planet gathered, not as separate nations, but as a unified front. General Voss stood at the center of the chamber as Commander Vale entered. This time, there was no battlefield. No weapons. Only understanding. You have returned, Voss said. Yes, Vale replied. To fight? No. A brief pause. To speak. That alone marked the shift. For the first time, the Dominion was not dictating terms. It was requesting them. We underestimated you, Vale said. We misjudged your capabilities. That will not happen again. Voss studied him carefully. No, she said. It won't. There was no arrogance in her tone. Only certainty. We have no interest in conquest, she continued. But we will not tolerate it. Vale nodded. That is understood. The conversation that followed was not about surrender or victory. It was about boundaries, coexistence, a new balance of power. Across the galaxy, the story began to spread, not as rumor, as fact. A fleet destroyed in minutes. A dominant empire forced to reconsider. A species that had been dismissed as primitive proving something no one expected. That strength did not always look the way it was assumed to. That preparation could outweigh superiority. That underestimation could be fatal. Other civilizations took notice. Some approached Earth with caution. Others with curiosity. All with respect. Because the message had been delivered exactly as intended. Earth was not defenseless. Earth was not weak. Earth was not available for conquest. And if challenged, the outcome would not change. In a quiet command room overlooking a map of the stars, General Voss reviewed new data streams arriving from deep space. Trade proposals, diplomatic requests, surveillance reports, and something else. A pattern. Faint, distant, unfamiliar. One of the analysts spoke carefully. We're detecting anomalies beyond mapped sectors. Movement patterns not consistent with known civilizations. Voss looked at the data. Unknown. Yes. A brief silence followed. Then she nodded. Keep monitoring. Because the lesson of the past 18 months was clear. Preparation mattered. And whatever was out there would not find humanity unready.